All right, welcome everyone to this next episode of 30 Minutes with a Hacker. This is Jade Woody with Tech Data, and I'm real excited here to have as our guest from SyCom Technologies out of Richmond, Virginia, Rick Lull and Alan Jenkins. Rick is lead security consultant for SyCom, and Alan Jenkins is the CISO. Guys with just a ton of experience in the industry and one of the leading VARs in the Richmond and surrounding areas from a security perspective. So we're thrilled to have you guys on. From the tech data side, as usual, we have our team of engineers slash ethical hackers, guys that have been in the trenches for many, many years and consult with our government and are just very, very knowledgeable. So as many of you have been listening to these podcasts over the last year and a half, we're try and pick their brains and find out really what does a hacker think about these different issues. And today's topic is around returning back safely to work. So before we get into that, I'd love to just give Rick a chance to kind of give a little bit of background on SyCom and just what your company does and just a little bit more background on you guys.
Thanks. So very quickly, SyCom is a IT infrastructure and security solution provider. We are based in Richmond, Virginia. We've been based in Richmond now for over 20 years. And while our mission is, we say our business is technology, really what we're trying to do is trying to help our customers being able to focus on the personal aspect of their day-to-day work. So our mission statement is that we want to provide outstanding and memorable service in everything we do.
Great. Well, we're really excited again to have you guys. And as I was mentioning, this is a discussion because companies now are in that process of having employees return back to work. And it's a slow migration, as we're seeing. We've dedicated the last 2 months podcast to some of the vulnerabilities of working remotely. But as people are starting to migrate back in, we wanted to talk about the security risks that we're seeing in doing so and what steps can be taken to protect ourselves. So I wanted to give Alan Jenkins with SyCom a chance to kind of set the table on this discussion of what you guys are seeing and what you guys are anticipating to happen as we kind of break into this.
Sure. Thanks a lot. So just like every other engineering and consulting company, probably over the last 6 months, we've helped a lot of people make transitions to working in a different way. And that looks like we're on the horizon of doing that again. So with having a lot of people transition from working in a traditional office to working remotely, and oftentimes that meant working from home, now we're looking at possibly going back and having people move back into offices. And with that comes a lot of change, and change can be fraught with a lot of vulnerability. So the changing behaviors, the transition for a normal user who possibly didn't have a laptop in the past, but now has a laptop, has to figure out how they're going to handle these transitions back and forth from a home site to an office site. One of the things that we expect to happen is that organizations have discovered that people can be effective in working remotely. So we're hearing that a lot of organizations are considering moving to a hybrid environment where users may work a couple of days in the office and a couple of days at home. And while that's great for a work-life balance, that's going to introduce a whole lot of behavior and change. And as security folks, we realize that change opens up vulnerability. So we've got a lot of concerns there.
So, Alan, what are some things you guys did post-COVID to prepare people for the workforce working from home in terms of new infrastructure, maybe new appliances or security solutions that you put in place that you think are going to have to be leveraged in the same way, but for people as they return to the office? I mean, we heard a lot about people purchasing more security gear in preparation for the work from home group and individuals, do you expect organizations to keep that type of infrastructure in place, or for them to tear it down and just start afresh and anew with something else?
I don't think we'll see a lot of fresh, so to speak, but I do think we'll see a little bit of both. And what I mean by that is I do expect that a lot of that infrastructure will remain, and some of that was the ramping up of things like VPN solutions to support larger densities of users, things like virtual desktop infrastructure that was either built brand new or built to scale. Those aren't trivial things to tear back down, and oftentimes it's a significant investment in time and energy to do. So I expect a lot of that will stay in place. We do have some solutions out there where you can leverage things like the cloud and cloud solutions from vendors, where you could turn on some of those services more on a subscription base. I think some of that may be dialed back down. But again, to the original point, I don't think that we're going to go back to normal, quote unquote. I think there's going to be a new normal, and I hate to say that because everybody uses that term, but I do think there'll be new behaviors, and much of that infrastructure will still need to be in place.
Well, and the new normal is probably people's adjustment and more to the adaptation of cloud-based usage for different types of applications and infrastructure, right? Something we were talking about during our pre-show is some items you guys have discovered while working in the cloud and with different types of infrastructures that reside there, whether it's Azure or AWS or specifically related to some of Microsoft's products. So do you want to just go ahead and walk us through maybe some best practices or some things you guys are doing to make sure there is security in the cloud? Because frequently, right, we joked about it beforehand that many people just think the features are turned on and that they're secure because they're already operating there. So maybe Rick or Alan, you guys tag team this, but just walk us through some of those things. Maybe what you, Alan, as a CISO see and recommend, maybe like give your virtual CISO knowledge, and then as a consultant, maybe walk us through some of what you've seen, Rick.
Sure. I'll take that first. So, one of the things that I try to do as a CISO and as a virtual CISO for folks is to try to stay on top of trends and be ahead of threats as best as we can. One of the things that I saw recently from an EDUCAUSE blog was actually a poll that was conducted that asked about the 4 most important tasks for a security environment. And I think that ties directly into this conversation. The top 2 that they called out were around security awareness and training, and then the second were around email hygiene. And I think that plays directly into that cloud discussion, because email, for the bulk of our customers, has moved to the cloud. And the concern that we have as consultants, and that I have as a CISO or a virtual CISO for customers, is the assumption that because I'm in the cloud, I'm secure. So going in and making sure that the hygiene functions have been turned on. So things like SPF and DKIM to make sure that impersonation of domain names can't easily be done is really important. But we find in every day, I worked with a customer just a few days ago who had email appliances in place but had not turned on some of those features. So just by turning it on and plugging it in.
Yeah, and to add on to what Alan is saying.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say he made a great point there, because a lot of the time people buy the latest and greatest next generation whatever, right, add the tagline in, and they think that if they plug it in and include it into their infrastructure, they're that much more secure. But it does come down to that granular look you mentioned of reviewing how you have the appliances configured, and if all the feature sets you should be utilizing you are. So Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, like I said, to kind of add on to that, as kind of people have shifted the paradigm, a lot more remote work, a lot more stuff in the cloud. There's a lot. I would say that we saw lots of customers, rapidly change their amount of uptake of that stuff, and it was lots of, just slam it in. We need to get this done because we have to support our users and our business. But I think it's definitely worthwhile now that maybe it's a little calmer, you could say, take a good hard look at that stuff to make sure that, okay, are we taking advantage of all the features that, we kind of have included in our various cloud subscriptions, and are we configured appropriately and securely? And like I said, we're starting to see some customers starting now to be able to come up for air, take a breath, and then ask us, okay, we did all this stuff, what might be a good next step? What do you recommend that we do? And I'm also hearing from a couple of customers kind of thoughts about pivoting, kind of where their spend, they might have aimed for, let's say, a network refresh at their office. And they might be saying, well, you know what, if we kind of pull back from having as much office space as we have today, I don't need that much infrastructure, but I could potentially take that funding and turn it into something else, whether that's, more permanent, more security feature rich remote access for folks. Again, we're starting to hear that sort of rumblings that people are now having a chance to, not just panic, but think and say, okay, how can I best architect this for the future? Wherever we might find ourselves.
Well, I think you guys have dialed in on a couple important points there. And one is that nobody prepared for the massive scramble to remote working from home. So there's probably some steps or shortcuts that were taken execution-wise that probably need to be cleaned up, because we all are hearing that the office is not going to be as big, there are not going to be as many people there, and therefore when we adjust not only from the scramble that we had, but the scramble to support remote work, and then the scramble now for who's going to return to the office, there's a lot of adjustment that's taking place. But it's a great observation to say, if you don't need that big old building anymore, if you don't need all that infrastructure anymore, those funds could easily be applied to better protections of your company through cybersecurity. And of course, that still means something very different, and very likely you're going to need help in your strategy going forward from that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, we're seeing some customers that literally never had ever thought about a remote work strategy at all. They had VPN for the IT guy to dial in and support if he was going to, quote unquote, on vacation. And now they're looking at their office space and looking and going, you know what, we might be able to collapse to a couple of really great looking conference rooms and that kind of thing, and maybe a couple of hoteling spaces. And, instead of needing 10, 20, 30, 50 switches, now we need 3, and we can spend that money elsewhere. I think what will be most interesting is what we see in our educational and local government customer spaces, because to this point, at least for, kind of where we are at, the footprint that we see, the whole education vertical is a moving target of what they're going to attempt to do. And I've heard, I would say, rumors of 3 for $1. And it will be very interesting, because that's a place where the budget cycles, in a lot of cases, control what they can do. And I think a good chunk of those folks have found themselves somewhat on place from a budget perspective, where they had planned much earlier in the year. Okay, this summer we're going to do X, Y, Z, and now that may not be a great investment.
Tech Data has got 14,000 employees. We're global, being the largest distributor of technology in the world. And the assumption, I think, going into the survey we just did was people will be eager to return to work because they can be more effective there. And greater than 85% of our staff said, I've never been as productive as I am. Working from home is awesome. I don't want to go back to the office. And so there has definitely been a huge shift. One of the neat things about being in distribution is you hear about all kinds of industries across the board. And I am personally surprised, happy, delighted, but very surprised that a lot of companies are saying, we don't need an office. Like, this is working. We've been being forced into this, proved to us something we were too afraid to check out. But now that we've checked it out, we know we don't need an office anymore. And so we're making the transition. And I'm both delighted and surprised, but that also presents a much greater cybersecurity challenge, a much more simple approach, but a greater challenge.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, in an awful lot of companies, their entire security stack and approach was predicated on the fact that everybody is in the office. And now everyone's going to be wherever they could be. And what will be really interesting is if we see more and more remote work where you're not local anymore. It's one thing to say, oh, well, I'm going to work from home, even though the office is still a 20 or 25 or 30-minute drive away. What happens when you go, I really want to live in a small town in the middle of nowhere in Kansas or, Indiana or in the mountains of Vermont. If you think about it, it's like wherever you can get high-speed internet, you can potentially work from. And, what does that mean to keep people secure when, they could be potentially in a different time zone? That's going to be a challenge for an awful lot of firms that never had to think about that. And we even have some conversations with some firms that their business is very much kind of driven on site. They're figuring out ways to make it a little easier to deal with. We have a company, a customer of ours, longtime customer, great guys to work with. Their business is basically rock. I mean, literally, they dig rock out of the ground and make gravel and things like that for folks, to become roads and foundations, all that kind of fun stuff. And they're trying to figure out how they can help the actual folks that are in the plants that produce this stuff, how they can kind of monitor and help manage that stuff from, at one point it was, from quote unquote headquarters, but now they're starting to think, well, you know what, this means people can be at home and we don't need to have people come to the office. Though, of course, they have a beautiful office, but, that's not, of course, not true for everybody.
But one of the things that comes to mind for me there, though, is that sort of speeds up this process that we saw coming for a while now. Is the network is no longer the what it used to be. So the border that we could put up and build that castle and say you can't come in and get to our stuff, we saw that changing. What's happened is this circumstance, this COVID problem, has sped that up. So this borderless network issue has jumped out in front of us, and it's good and bad. A number of our customers have seen this work from home as their annual DR test, right? And it effectively can be, but a lot of them, success was, can somebody go home and get a connection and do at least half of their job from home? Success wasn't all the due diligence that we would put into a normal security audit or an assessment to determine all of the security factors. So I think going back to what was said earlier around, we may be able to recover funds from real estate spending and pivot that over and use that for security. I think that's a great idea, but as a CISO, what I find I have to do always is justify that spend in security. So I think going back to a risk-based approach and saying to any organization, well, where is your gold? Where are the important things? And figuring out how we're going to protect them. And we start to pose that question and find that the gold is no longer inside of a moat and a castle, but the gold is in 5 different clouds and some colo data centers. Then if we can paint those pictures, then we'll be more successful in redirecting those funds to build the security rigor into the solutions.
And I think that is a great picture you just painted, honestly, with so few words. And so I'm curious, right, as a virtual CISO, what do you think are some risks that maybe organizations need to start to take into consideration? And I understand, depending upon the industry vertical, you can have different types of risk concerns. I get that. But as they move into and migrate towards maybe just office spaces with a couple of offices and a collaborative working space and a little bit of meeting rooms, what could the landscape begin to look like, and what could we shift towards?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I want to leave some airspace here to give Rick time to talk about this as well. But I think from my perspective, as a person who would advise someone on the security considerations as they move into those spaces, if it were possible to take more of a security first approach as we go into these spaces and take the considerations around how to build things secure up front, That would be nice. That's really hard to do because oftentimes we're you know, I think the phrase that I hear most is we're working on the airplane while we're flying it. That's the place that we find ourselves a lot of the time with security. So if we get into a place where we could build security in first, that would be great. I think a lot of the complexity of cloud and truly multi-cloud opens up a lot of opportunity if you're a bad guy to do bad things with that data. So it would be important to me, and has been important to me as we advise customers, that as they move into what we used to call new paradigms, they're not really now, but these multi-cloud environments, to put these things under a microscope and give them the rigor that they require. I'll say one more thing about that, and then I'll give Rick some chance to jump in. So an example is I did some work with a customer about a year ago now, who did their typical yearly DR plan and DR execution. And when it came time to do that, the guys who were tasked with actually executing the DR plans and whatnot found that a number of the systems that they had planned the previous year to support in the DR exercise were no longer on-premise. They were in the cloud, and they didn't know how to DR those things. And when they went to the business unit who had purchased the cloud services, they got told, well, you don't have to worry about it, it's in the cloud. Well, that's not true. And so what I was able to do was go in and then spend time with those cloud vendors and talk to them about how they could provide recoverability to this particular customer. And what we found, and which probably isn't news to anybody on this call, but what we found is the bulk of cloud vendors that we worked with didn't really have a good recovery story. They had a good replication story. And that can be good, but if we go back to the old sort of garbage in, garbage out scenario, if I get bad data in my cloud, it's just going to go around to all the cloud data centers really quick. So that doesn't help me in a DR scenario. So that's a little bit of an aside, but I think the complexities that this new shift is going to provide present some challenges that are not necessarily easy to deal with.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And then kind of to add on there, you know, thinking about a situation where a big bulk of the workforce is remote, you know, lots of basically, you know, one person offices dispersed everywhere. You know, this might be a chance for folks to think about like maybe like an SD-WAN solution, but, you know, want to check to make sure you've got the security there that you want, the visibility that you would like to have. Because if you think about it, you know, that thought about, oh, we used to protect everybody in the castle with a moat and the dragon and all that kind of fun stuff, you know, either you have to replicate that everywhere, which is going to be, you know, complex and expensive and probably a pretty big, you know, pain in the drain to take care of, or think of things that can help you with like, you know, the automation, orchestration type options to help you kind of have this thing at scale. And take care of it. And I think what's also a part that folks are starting to wake up to is understanding that a distributed company is going to take an awful lot more specialized knowledge than what they might have on staff. So they might look for, you know, potentially organizations like SyCom or some of our partners to, you know, help them get a handle on all these now additional moving pieces. You know, instead of having to track, you know, it used to be, oh, I got a couple of big things I got to take care of. Now I've got, you know, potentially hundreds of little things to take care of. And I think we see an awful lot of our customers that are, you know, pretty small IT shops, you know, they don't really have the bandwidth to take care of hundreds of little things. They're kind of built to take care of a couple of big things, and that's basically it. So, you know, so I imagine we're going to have that discussion, help customers articulate to their executive leadership, you know, why it's good to make the upfront investments in security, why it's good to, you know, have kind of a future architecture that's got the security baked into it, and be able to show, hey, you know, we can move these investments around, and at the end of the day, you're actually going to get productivity gains out of this, as well as being maybe more secure than you were before, because I think we're also going to have to focus on making sure that we are armoring up our employees that are going to be aware. That maybe we had let slide because we were dependent upon our technical controls when everybody was, behind those castle walls. So something else that I think to consider, and got a couple of customers that are they're starting to get the light bulb. They're starting to go, maybe I can, and I think that's the stuff that we want to see. The customer that puts their head back in the sand, they're going to continue to have challenges that they're not going to be able to meet effectively, just because they honestly don't want to hit this stuff head on. And honestly, I think that's a mistake, because Alan and I talk all the time, and we say, security is almost a game of pay me now, pay me later. You're going to pay, you don't know when, but if you pay on the kind of upfront, in a lot of cases make your long-term investment easier to deal with, maybe a little more structured versus, having a surprise discovering that something is wrong, Sunday night at midnight. So just a couple other thoughts to think around that sort of topic.
Well, certainly training is definitely a future opportunity, because with all of this shifting, it's very clear that you're going to have to resynchronize your team and help them understand how all the pieces fit together, because most people had an idea, or had at least a cultural idea, and that's definitely shifted. So training is definitely out of sync, but that, I think, is preceded by updating your policies and strategies, documentation. It was probably in a bad shape before, but now probably is completely irrelevant. So if you're an organization and you want to survive a significant anything occurring, it's really incumbent upon you to get on top of documenting your new policies and procedures to reflect your reality. And then once you've done that, then I think there's a great opportunity for them to proceed into a training mode to help resynchronize everybody, because effective organizations know what they do, know who does what, and are able to execute to that.
I think
absolutely, and that's a great way to think about it. And I think that also that chance to do the policy, that's the place where I see you have a chance to, re-engage with the executive leadership for their support going forward. That's a place that I think Alan really plays an awful lot and is helping people, kind of set the expectations, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Two of the things that we see as concerns that were concerns before this started, but they didn't go away because this started here for us, is there's a new cybersecurity regulation called CMMC that affects DoD supply chain contractors. It's a pretty big deal. And another one that's maybe a little more local for us, but I'm sure there's some nationwide pressures as well. There's a voter registration security. So in Virginia, there's a new House Bill 2178 that was passed that requires some due diligence and security around the access to the voter registration databases. Both of those things are still important, and they both still have a ticking clock, so to speak, because we want our voter systems to be secure before nationwide elections. But both of those things pivot back to me. When we talk to customers about them, we talk about setting a secure infrastructure around whatever that thing is. If it's DoD data, then we have to focus on that data. If it's voter registration data, we focus on that data. But policy is important, and then hygiene items. So encryption, backups, and recovery, all those key things are really important, and they don't change. They're important no matter what.
Great point, Alan. We're at the top of the hour. This has been a really great discussion. Appreciate you and Rick coming on board and joining us with this conversation and representing SyCom out of Richmond. So with that, we'll close this out and look forward to next month's call on 30 Minutes with the Hacker. So thanks, everyone. Take care.